Welcome to Financial Clarity, the podcast dedicated to helping service-based small business owners achieve financial success. Join us as we demystify financial concepts, get practical tips from seasoned entrepreneurs, and discover strategies to increase profit and value. Hannah Smolinski here. I'm the host of the Financial Clarity podcast, where I connect successful entrepreneurs, financial experts, and leaders in the small business community. Past guests include Darla Powell, a former law enforcement officer turned interior decorator, who then turned around and started a marketing agency, and Nikki Rausch, a sales expert who teaches business owners how to sell their services without becoming salesy. So if either of those sound interesting, please go and check out those past episodes. And we will also make sure that they are linked in the show notes. So make sure you check out that page as well. Today's episode is brought to you by my company, Clara CFO Group. Clara CFO is dedicated to providing financial clarity and profit maximizing solutions to small businesses. The team at Clara CFO are seasoned accounting professionals with a heart for small business. We help growth-minded entrepreneurs thrive through fractional CFO services and financial education. To learn more about Clara CFO Group and how we can help your business, visit claracfo.com. All right, so today's guest is extra special and because she is part of our team here at Clara CFO Group. Laura Shiel is a virtual CFO with us and loves working with small businesses. She has a tenured career in accounting and finance, including public accounting, is where we actually met each other, financial services, including a hedge fund and investment management company, and corporate finance for a large Fortune 500 company. She is a CPA and a CFA, that's a Chartered Financial Analyst, and she is a wife, mom of 2 young daughters, and lives in Portland, Oregon. And she says that the best part of her role as a virtual CFO is seeing clients make confident, bold decisions in their companies with the support of strategic financial analysis and leadership. Laura, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I get to see you every week on Zoom, but this is kind of a fun change up to be able to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, and I'm a subscriber of the podcast, so I love all the guests that you have on. It's been really fun to listen to the conversations you've been having. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that this will be like a little bit of a change up for our audience because a lot of times we're interviewing business owners, but we kind of wanted to give a kind of a sneak peek into our process. And that's kind of what the topic of today's podcast is about. And you were hugely instrumental in developing this process and the framework that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But before we get there, I was wondering if you could elaborate on your bio a little bit more and tell us about your career trajectory and how we met at EY at Ernst & Young and got to work together there and we started working together like almost 10 plus years later. So I'd love for the audience to understand a little bit more of your career trajectory and how you came to work here.
Yeah. For someone outside of accounting or finance, it may sound like all those positions that you listed off are accounting and finance, but it's actually, I've taken quite a bit of different hops around within the broader scope of accounting. And I really love numbers and I'm really curious. That's kind of where I've kind of hopped all around. I started in public accounting because I kind of liked accounting from high school. My high school happened to have a accounting class, and I don't feel like a lot of kids that age are exposed to what accounting is.
Yeah.
Got hooked, and public accounting was a great place to start my career. And I'm sure you would probably say the same thing. You get to see so many different types of businesses, get to talk to so many different leaders, and really get a sense of how businesses work through auditing them. So I did that for a while and really kind of felt myself being pulled into investments from there. One of the big clients that I had was an insurance company that had a lot of investments. And my favorite part was getting into the stocks and the bonds and everything that we were looking at as part of the audit. So I worked with hedge funds and investment managers for quite a while. I got my CFA there, which is really about analyzing a lot of financial data. So I'd say that although I'm not in investments anymore, learning a lot about that has helped in the role that I'm now at with Clara. And really got to progress through investment management and then kind of wanted to take a little bit of a pivot. So I went to work for a large Fortune 500 company based here in Oregon. Nike, which a lot of folks know, is a really big company. So kind of went 180 back to working for a private company or a single company, and really different type of skill sets needed. I think that now that I think about every kind of like stage of my career, they've all kind of come together in this role. Working for one company and trying to understand how profitability is working, specific aspects of our seasonal revenue, really translates to what I'm doing today with small businesses with Clara, but each of the roles did as well. So I kind of feel like it may have felt a little bit like I was bouncing all around, but now I use each of those roles in a different way when I work with small businesses. Now it's all really come together. And I feel like I have a really well-rounded, I've seen a lot of things to be able to help any small business with an issue that comes up, because there's been a lot of different ones. And I feel like I've touched a lot of them now through that career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I love that. I mean, each one of the steps that you've taken has kind of provided like a different skill set. And I think that's definitely comes true. Like when you work with, small businesses like we do, being able to switch between different ones and advise one business and then turn around and advise another and then turn around and advise another. But like is so much like our time working as auditors is like you could be put on one engagement for 1 week and then turn around and start working on a different engagement, totally different business models. But you're still having conversations with clients. Like a lot of that like comes into the skill set. But then yeah, like digging into like specific issues and thinking more large, like strategically and bigger picture. I mean, that's a lot like working for, a single company where you have to be kind of part of the team and be, put on that hat as well. So, I mean, it seems to be working great overall. So we're so happy to have you on the team. It's been awesome to be able to work with you. One of the things that we've implemented this past year for clients and what we want to talk about today is this strategic financial planning framework. And that is really kind of a broader way that we can help organize some of the things that we want our clients to be working on um, throughout the year and something that we can help support them with. But this is something that is not just something we've pulled out of our heads, like we've created it from scratch. You've noticed this from some of the companies you've worked with in the past. So, and you actually really brought this idea to my attention at the beginning to be like, hey, what if we structure this in a different way? So, what were some of the thoughts that you had as you were thinking about this for Clara and Clara clients specifically?
Yeah. So first thing is that I'd been probably at Clara almost a year when I kind of started to formulate this idea. And so I'd seen a lot of similar themes with clients. And one of the core services we offer is budgeting. So in Q4, we work with all of our clients to make sure we're setting them up with a good financial plan and for the following year. And having gone through that cycle one time, I realized that that's really important, but it's not the only thing. There's so much that leads up to that will result in a successful budget.
Mm.
So I was seeing these themes about going through the budgeting cycle once, and then kind of then tracking against that budget and how close we were with certain clients or how far off we were with others. Some ideas developed on this isn't just a quarterly thing. Like we need to one quarter thing. We need to kind of spread out this planning longer than that. And then also I leaned on my experience with Nike and the whole strategic process that they run there, which I know is very similar to a lot of other large corporations because folks that I worked with there had worked at other ones and said, even sometimes the acronyms that we used were the same. Like
Mm.
everyone's kind of drawing from this similar playbook because it is really successful and works with companies at that level. Now, having married that knowledge from my past role with what I was seeing with small businesses, I really thought there's something that could come together here that's not going to be the same process Nike runs. And it's not going to necessarily be exactly how we've been doing it in the past, but it's taking learnings from that big company process and applying it and tailoring it to what small businesses need. Really, there was some opportunity here to put some more structure in place and keep revisiting themes that will kind of build on each other throughout the quarter. So as we kind of talk through in a minute, what actually we're talking about when we say what the framework is, they really kind of, I think of it like a wheel. So we're addressing something that's building onto the next, and then it keeps coming back. Like it's a reoccurring thing that I think is so important that companies consider, because you can build a great strategy or talk about a really important thing that you want to do in the future. But if you don't keep that in mind and keep revisiting it, then it
Yes.
can kind of fall by the wayside. So I think there was a really important element of reviewing and recycling as I was thinking about the framework too.
Yeah. I love that. Um, I think that there are so many things that large businesses are doing, these Fortune 500 businesses, that I mean, then a lot of people even written books who are working with Fortune 500 companies. They don't always directly translate into what will work well for a small business, because we don't necessarily have all the teams in place. We don't necessarily have all the structure, and maybe some of the tools and whatnot to do some of these things. But I like that we've taken the idea and the concept and said, okay, how does that actually play for a small business? And when we say small business, we really mean like a small business anywhere from like making $100,000 a year all the way up to, I mean, we work with clients that are at 20-30 million dollars, kind of on the higher end in annual revenue. So a lot of these businesses, you know, they still need structure, and we need a framework, and we need strategy. And that's kind of why we've modified it that way for
Yeah.
them specifically, because we've seen them and we know how they operate, and then we've seen this process year over year. So do you want to go ahead and start and tell us about the first quarter,
Yeah. So actually
which is not the first?
yes, surprise, it's not Q1. So we start the framework in Q2, and that might come as a little bit confusing to some folks. But really the reason why is I'd spoken about budgeting being such a core focus of fourth quarter. We wanted to kind of step back a little bit into how do we get to build a really successful budget in Q4. And so that doesn't actually start all the way at the beginning of the year. That's quite a bit of time to go by. And Q1 we have reserved for a different sort of topic. Q2 is the important part, or we kind of consider like the beginning of the cycle. So that's where we revisit our strategic vision. And we put that there because Q3 is sales and marketing. So it's like starting at 300,000 or 30,000 feet. You're up in an airplane, like looking over your business, making sure your strategy is sound, having a solid mission, vision, values. And then we kind of take a step down from each as we move through into Q4. So Q2 is poised in that really important time where it's not the beginning of the year where we're trying to execute on a plan, but we've had a little bit of space, and now we can level up, revisit, here are our overarching long-term goals for the company, like 3 to 5 years out, where do we want to be? And then we kind of cycle it down until we get into really Q4 planning for the next fiscal year. So starting high level Q2, and then Q3 goes into sales and marketing, and then Q4 we're down into that nitty gritty. But without having kind of that level up and looking higher level from the beginning, then it becomes more of a like day-to-day exercise. It's not really making sure that what plan we're creating for next year is tied back to that longer term vision. That's really important to have that alignment there with Q2. And also Q2 doesn't necessarily have to be super financial, which is an interesting aspect for us. But it is very critical that we understand a business's strategic vision, where they're going for the future. And we have a lot of resources that we can help if a company doesn't have those things. But really, it's about we are our clients' financial support. And if we don't understand that vision that the owner or the leadership team has for the future, we're not able to really help them make decisions that are in the best interest of that strategy. So we can help create one if they need, but really it's about we understand what it is so we can be the best support and partner for them throughout the cycle, and also just day-to-day decision making too.
Yeah. I was actually just on a call earlier today talking with some of our friends over at Giraffe, and they were asking kind of about that, about how do you touch base with your clients about their strategic goals? Because that is such a big part of planning. And it was good to like reiterate like that when we first start working with a client and our kickoff, we always start with goals, because if we don't know what you're working towards, we're not going to be able to be great advisors. So we have to be able to make sure that we're aligning with your goals. But this, we might work with somebody for 4 or 5 years. Like, I mean, we've had clients who've basically been with us ever since the business has started. And so you can't just have that one conversation and then 5 years later still think that you're in the same that you still have the same goals, that you still have the same mission, and even the same vision for the company. So that's the importance of like touching base with these every year,
Yeah.
on a regular cadence. I love seeing that and working it into the plan, because, a business owner could have maybe a life change that, maybe makes them completely rethink their entire business. Or maybe they're like, hey, I want to go in a different direction, or maybe I want to bring on a partner, or maybe I actually want to sell in 3 years. Like, the way that we advise a business that wants to sell in 3 years versus a business that maybe wants to like pass it on to their employees in 10 or 15 years is like a really different, a different set of advice that we need to give. So, I think that making sure that we're aligned is critical to the whole process. And that's why I like starting there as well. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, that sometimes we have clients that are really, really clear on that. Like, they come in, they have everything dialed in, they know their mission, vision, values, they can recite them, their team can recite them. Maybe they're doing something like EOS, like the Entrepreneur Operating System, where maybe they've gone through this process and they've established those really clearly. Then that's a great time to just loop us in and make sure that we know that. But if you don't have them, we can also help with some of that. So we've developed some worksheets and things that will help businesses kind of, if they don't have those, we can point them to resources that they can work on it. Um, we are, and then we can help make sure that they have what they need in place so that we can help them go into the next stage of strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we did this year too that I thought was great, some clients really love this, they hadn't read it before, is there's a great book out there called Vivid Vision.
Mhm.
And it's by Cameron.
Cameron Harold.
Cameron Harold, that's right. And so
Want to
a
have
lot
him
of,
on the podcast.
oh, yay, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So that's another great resource too. For the premise of that book is just taking some time away to really kind of think through what is the future of your business. And so I know several of our clients read it for the first time this year and did that exact exercise. So, resources like the book, worksheets to help kind of questions on, what's important to you as a business owner, where do you see your company in the future? Even doing things like a SWOT analysis, which is where you look at the business and look at what the strengths are that currently, what your weaknesses are, your opportunities and your threats. That's a little bit like textbook business school, but it's also really important to revisit, because for my clients, a couple of them this year are in a very different world now than when we were in COVID and lockdown. And so they're experiencing a lot of changes to their business. So it's important to kind of look at the strategy. Maybe they developed it during that time. Does it need to be tweaked now? And so it's good for us to be able to like at least revisit this every year, so that, as the industry changes too, people are moving with that change and adapting to make sure that we're successful in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if we need to be, maybe looking at some things in the coming year that we never had to do before.
Mhm.
If your competitive environment is changing, you need to be adaptive to that. So I think that kind of leads us into the next quarter, really.
Yeah,
Anything else you want to touch on vision or
I don't
strategic?
think so.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's good. So when we get into Q3, we like to really focus on sales and marketing, and this is kind of looking forward through to the next year. So we like to focus in Q3 for this, and we kind of separate this out from the budgeting section, because it does kind of take it. It should be have some time to focus on just sales and marketing, because they are probably the hardest thing to predict. Sales in particular is probably one of the hardest things to predict and forecast for and plan for in any business. A lot of our expenses are really pretty easy to predict. If we're like, hey, software costs, we kind of know what those are. Hey, headcount, we can kind of estimate, the cost of headcount, even though that is even a little bit difficult. But knowing how much you're going to sell can be a really tricky one. So one of the things that we like to help clients with is to help them understand, what they've done in the past that's been successful. How can they forecast or at least know the activities that they need to be doing in order to generate sales, and help them kind of identify sales targets, and then kind of back into basically help them kind of build a sales plan, and then also the marketing dollars that they're going to need to help to get to that sales plan. So I was wondering if maybe about it, you could give an example of how this works very practically.
Yeah. Before I get into the example, one thing I want to also say is what we had found in kind of traditional budgeting is trying to come up with that sales target number and the whole P&L. And, we want to end the year with a really solid, complete plan, but trying to do all of that at the same time, we really just sometimes end up picking, here's a great sales target to go after. But what I want to revisit is that you mentioned the activities to do. To get to that sales plan. And that's what I think was really crunched for time when we tried to do it all within the same period is we need to set sales targets, what we think is realistic. But then the most important thing to me is what behaviors are we going to do to achieve those sales numbers? And we can't really wait until we get into the new year. It's, sometimes requiring us to set things up ahead of time so that you can hit January with the effect of new marketing tactics or behaviors or ways of selling, and you're not missing out on any point in the year. So giving more space to that, I think, was really the important part of having it be in Q3 is that we really have a conversation, and also what are we doing to achieve those numbers versus just I want to do 30% growth next year.
Right.
But we don't have any plan on how to do that.
I agree. That's how a lot of people budget. They're like, oh, I want to grow 20% over prior year. I want to grow blah, blah, blah. But then what do you need to be doing to win those contracts to actually get that 20% growth? Like that you have to take that multiple steps back. And this podcast is really a lot of B2B service providers are listening to this. And we kind of know that cycle of like, if you're going to have sales, that doesn't just happen. It's not like somebody walks into a store and is buying something from you. You probably had to make some type of connection with somebody, maybe a networking event, or you met somebody at a conference, or somebody filled out your lead form on your website, and then you had a consultation, and then you did maybe a little bit of work for them, and then maybe X, Y, or Z. I mean, some of our clients have to go through RFP processes where that's very, very long lead times before the dollars actually show up into their account. So I do like that too. I mean, 6 months ahead of time, you're thinking about sales for the next year, which I think is really smart. I want to point people to the episode we did with Jason Swank as well. So he's helps agency owners grow their businesses. And he talked about that cycle of especially the sole owner, when there's one main person running a business, and they spend most of their time doing some business development, and then they go and do the work, and then they go and do business development, and then they do the work. And you get these big fluctuations of sales coming in, and then no sales coming in, and then sales coming in, and then no sales coming in. So I think if anybody's ever felt that, this sales and marketing focus is designed as well to sort of help smooth out that up and down, so that we can be looking ahead and figure out what we need to be doing consistently to avoid those, high fluctuations of sales and then none.
Yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on cash flow too, because your expenses are
so
pretty
much.
steady all the time. That's where we get into some trouble and tight spots.
Absolutely.
But to my example, it actually ties in Q2's theme of strategic vision and sales and marketing together, we have one client that does a lot of contracting to other nonprofit companies. And actually, in the strategic visioning quarter, we set financial goals for 3 years out. And we don't do this with all of our clients. This particular client, that's the approach that we took. So they knew where they wanted to be 3 years from now. And it was really coming from a place of where they wanted to make investments. So this is the revenue that they had to do to achieve that. So we kind of set those goals in Q2. And then when we came into Q3, we said, okay, to get here in 3 years, we probably need to be this place in 2024. Mm-hmm. And so that gave us a revenue number to look at. But a lot of the contracts that this client has are not just within 2023. They extend, some of them multiple years, but most of them into some period into the coming year. So we could say, and I'm just going to use made up numbers here to, not give away any confidential information, but say that the client's 2024 revenue goal was $5 million. We were able to look at all of the contracts that we have today and say, okay, well, we know that this much is extending into next year. So we've already got, $2 million covered because we have signed contracts and these projects are going to go through next year. So that leaves what I call a gap, but we can also say like, a go to find is another kind of term that people throw around. We have $3 million left we need to find in revenue in order to meet our sales target of 5. So then we can start to say, okay, of that, 60% left to find, what are we going to do to go after those? So the client started talking about, okay, we can start being on these podcasts that we've identified that, podcasts can sometimes take a long time to lead to anything. So, looking far ahead on when do we need to start that process? These are the conferences that we want to go to. These are the conversations that we want to have. We want, the leadership team to be taking, 2 to 3 networking opportunities a month. So either that's a lunch or a coffee or, some kind of communication with someone that could lead to something. And so I think step 1 is identifying what that amount that we need to figure out how we're going to get that revenue is. So that in that case, it's 3 million. And then the activities needed to do that we think are going to lead to that revenue next year. And I think that that's a smart way to approach it, because then it's also very measurable to say, my goal was to have these many conversations per month that will lead to revenue next year. Did I do that or did I not do that? Did I have some really awesome conversations? So maybe I only need to do 3 this year or 3 this month instead of 5. But I think really boiling it down to, oh my gosh, how am I going to find $3 million? That can sound really daunting. But the more that we can say, these are the things that we're going to do that should result in that revenue, the easier it's going to be, the more digestible, the more you can maybe perhaps delegate some things because it's a lot more tangible than just we got to find all this revenue for next year. So I thought that was a really great opportunity to distill it down and then also make it more manageable. It's not so overwhelming to say, yeah, $3 million is a lot of money to find, but here's what we're going to do and we're doing it to get there.
Yeah, I think it also will bring to light if your goals are unrealistic, or maybe, we want to set SMART goals. We want to set that realistic, achievable type of a goal. And so if you really start to boil it down and you say, well, actually, I need, 10 contacts for every 1 contract that I actually get in, you might find that, if that's the case and you need to have 10 contracts per month, maybe making 100 contacts isn't necessarily maybe not achievable. Or maybe you need to think about, well, why do I need 10 to 1? And think about how you can make yourself more effective. Like, do you actually need sales training? Do you need maybe a little bit more strategy in who you're approaching? There could be some things in that process too that you can start to think about, well, how can I, tweak these activities to make them more successful as well? And then with sales too, like during this quarter, we also like to look at your whole customer base and see is there a certain industry that's more, maybe more successful, more profitable? maybe it's trending a little bit more up, or maybe there's more opportunity in a certain business line versus another one. Times change every year. There's going to be years where, marketing budgets are flush and maybe you want to go out and try to, sell some business in that time. And then, years like this year, for example, marketing budgets are really being pulled back. So maybe there's certain businesses you should go after. So this is another reason why we want to revisit this every year and adjust the strategy accordingly, rather than, saying like whatever worked last year is definitely going to work for us again this year, because we need to always be thinking about what's happening on a more global scale as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can help with that. Like we, at least, we take a look at economic data, what's happening, what's being presented as kind of forecasts for next year on a macro level. And so a lot of clients I'll talk with and say, we're seeing this trend for maybe a little bit more specifically, your industry next year. So maybe it's not going to be able to grow as much as we did in prior years because we feel consumers pulling back or something like that. Like bringing in some macro data is something that we're well versed in and can help clients see, it's not going to be maybe the same picture as next year, or maybe it's, there's something really dynamic changing in your industry that we need to capitalize on. So we could expect more growth next year. So I love to do research on the industries that my clients are in to make sure that I understand the trends and the broader and economic situations, because that's something that small businesses can kind of be left out on. They're busy running the day to day and not always looking up and seeing more broadly what's happening to businesses like me, maybe a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, that I need to have awareness of as well. So we can help with that.
Yeah. I love that. Yes. Do you want to talk about Q4?
Yeah. Q4 is budgeting. That's where it all comes together. So we're focused on the next year's plan. So right now we're in the middle of Q4. So we're looking with our clients to create budgets for the 2024 calendar year. And as we're into this year, we should already have a really solid picture of our sales goal for next year, and even a solid idea of our marketing spend, because we've talked about both of those things in Q3. So now it's about rounding out the budget and looking at every line of your profit and loss. So all the types of things that money goes out, expenses. If you're a product-based business and have cost of goods sold or contractors, things directly tied to your revenue, we go through all of those lines and make sure that we're creating a solid budget for next year that's both realistic and all tied together. And at the end of the day, we should have a solid idea of what our profit is going to be. And that is really important to know, because that has so much implications for our cash, if we're going to be, tighter in cash or be able to make some investments. If we're, during the budgeting cycle, we go through and look at current staff. If we need to hire more, what is the financial impact of that? It's where we really just kind of bring that entire year together with everything that we know at this point in time. Now, that doesn't mean that something may happen next year that we didn't foresee, and we can adjust for that in the financial plan. We always do that with clients, but this is the best plan, the most realistic plan with the information that we have at this time, so that by the end of the year, before we hit January 1, clients know this is what I expect my year to be. Of course, we're going to pivot and we're going to shift, we're going to adjust if something alters that plan. But I think it's really important to go into the next year because there's so much that we want to execute on. We've got that solid plan in place and know what we need to do.
Yeah. I think this is a good time. Like, we set up the financial plan and then we kind of take a step back and look at it and say, okay, is everything that we want strategically included in the budget now? Maybe some of the marketing plans that we talked about in Q3, or maybe just some of the other initiatives or investments or things that we want to accomplish in 2024. Once we get them all into the budget, we need to look at that profit number and say, like, is this acceptable to us? I mean, most of our businesses that are B2B service companies, we're shooting for 20% profit margins or above. And so, like, if we're not seeing the profit, to where we want to be, we might need to start pulling some levers and say like, okay, we either need to make, maybe we need to look at increasing pricing. Maybe we need to look at maybe cutting some other things in the budget, or maybe we need to get a little bit more aggressive on our sales plans. So once we layer in everything that we've talked about, that's where we kind of start to, decide on some things that, do we want to include that expense or do we not want to include that expense? Do we want to wait on that one investment that you talked about wanting to do in January? Maybe we wait to do that until June or till we can see if our sales plans actually, come to fruition. So that's where like the strategic and the advisory comes in, where you have your conversation with your CFO about a budget. This is not just like a dictatorship of like, we give you the budget and then the business owner is supposed to go execute. So it is a very like iterative process between the business owner, the CFO, and we're listening, we're modifying, we're advising, and then it kind of circles back to where we land on kind of a final version of the budget that we can all be happy with, to say like, okay, here's our plan going into 2024.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I really like that iterative process. So we can come and say, like, based on what we know, conversations we've had throughout the year, here's like a draft of the budget. But at the end of the day, it's the client's business and their actions that are going to mean whether they meet that budget, and that's ultimate profitability or not. So it's really about working together to come up with a plan that feels doable and realistic, and also maybe a little stretch. Like, we want to, encourage folks to go a little bit outside of their comfort zone, maybe try some new things. If that isn't in line with overall what their goals are, we're here to support, but also, consider some alternative options so that they can ultimately receive their goals. So that's why, I'm having that understanding back in Q2 of, here's where you want to go. We can help, provide a different perspective on, what if we try this, or what if we pull back here? Just that well-rounded picture really helps us serve them the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the whole point, I mean, we set up a budget and then we report on it monthly. So it's not like we, let the whole plan go and just see what happens over the next year. I mean, that's the point of having the regular financial check-ins every single month with your CFO, is that we can really identify if we're skewing off of the plan, and maybe revenue, excuse me, and maybe if revenue is, we constantly overestimated revenue and we're not able to reach it, that's when we can start to analyze, well, why didn't we get there? What are we missing? What are we not doing? What activities are we not reaching? Or if we're constantly over on expenses, what is it? Are we making decisions? How are we not controlling our expenses to what we had planned for in the budget? So that's how you don't let the plan get too far off, is by having those like monthly check-ins and doing that analysis of like what actually happened versus what does the budget say. So super important. I mean, we definitely, the budget is a huge part of just overall financial management of a company. And then it's a part of, what your CFO can help you with every month. And then if plans change, we have a rolling forecast, which is like a modified budget every month. So we won't get too much into that. I actually just did a YouTube video on the difference between rolling forecast versus budget. So if you guys want to do that, we'll make sure to link it in the show notes. But I think we should go ahead and talk about the last quarter, which is actually quarter one.
Yes.
So Q1 of the fiscal year, we're going to call our kind of final quarter of the strategic financial planning. And that's really all about plan execution. So this is where we just, all of the plans that were put into place, this is where we measure and we execute. We execute and we measure. This is about reviewing the previous year and seeing like what went well, what do we need to work on, looking at the overall KPIs in the business. This is where we actually like are putting into place all of those plans. So everything that we laid out in the budget, the marketing plans, the sales initiatives, whatever we were doing, this is where we're actually putting it into place and then starting to track it. So if there are activities that we're trying to track, like if there's sales activities that you've identified, like let's say how many sales calls you want to make or how many networking events, can we track those and formalize them in some type of dashboard? And then, really just throughout the organization, this execution happens all throughout the year, but kind of the focus of it is like setting in motion in Q1, like get the execution in motion and how are you measuring it and how are you planning for it? Anything you want to add to that, Laura?
Yeah, and some really good ways we can set ourselves up in Q1 is through identification of some KPIs. So, Hannah mentioned the how many networking events. So that would be a great way that we could, consume data and track it. Or, what is our revenue per employee? Like, there's a lot of great different KPIs we can establish and then measure. And so we set that up. We have really great dashboarding capabilities with Drav, the software that we use with our clients. So every time I meet with clients, we kind of start at the dashboard and check in on how things are tracking against our plan. So this is really an opportunity to set up that kind of structure so that throughout the year, we're going to keep measuring against our goals and our KPIs and what we know is going to contribute to our success. But putting that kind of last piece in place so that we can do that throughout the year is what Q1 is really all about. It can even come down to if in the budgeting process we identified an investment we wanted to make in a new staff member, then Q1 could really just be about like, what are all of the things we need to do to make sure we get that person on board? So executing on the plan. And I think having a really clear set of steps to do that in Q1, even if they're not all being done in Q1, but it's easy to forget. So really setting the year up for success by putting all of that organization in place in Q1 is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because some of this stuff takes a long time to actually get going. So you don't want to, if you have a strategic initiative, you don't want to be in Q2 or Q3 and then go, oh yeah, we need to start doing that thing that we said we were going to do. Because it's going to take a while for that to have a positive financial implication. So, we're trying to think about how to put things in motion so that we can start to see results, right away. If you're starting to get these things and you're tracking your metrics from January, you're going to start hitting your goals earlier in the year, rather than trying to make it all up in Q4 or something like that. So,
it doesn't work.
No, it does. And then it causes a lot of stress. So you see a lot of year-end sales and opportunities and offerings at the end of the year. Well, I think this has been a really great, like overall view of the framework. I think, and then the idea is that then it just rolls back into Q2 and we kind of do it all over again. So is there anything else from like the big picture planning that you think that we should mention here?
I think that just no matter how big or small of a company you are, and whether you're a client or you're not a client, these are all really important concepts to hold space for. So if it's just a matter of, you block time in your calendar every July to think about your strategy, or you spend a couple meetings in September with your team thinking about your ideal customers. Like these are all concepts that if you let them get away from you are really going to inhibit growth and meeting your goals. So the framework applies whether you have a CFO or not, but giving the space to each of these concepts and financial management with the budget and creating the solid plan, like they're all things that it takes extra effort to make sure you're building it into your life or the way that you work in your business, but will ultimately help you reach your goals sooner and farther. So I think keeping these key concepts in mind is really, really important for any business owner to have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's why we wanted to talk about it because we feel like it's valuable. If you're working with us or you're working with somebody else, definitely some takeaways for everybody here. I think if you're gonna maybe take away one thing, although we'd like you to take away all of the concepts here, I think my favorite is really that making sure that you're starting with where you want to go. Where do you want to see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? What are your goals for the business? You really, if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to make a plan to get there. So that's kind of like my probably number one takeaway. I don't know. What do you have a different one, Laura, that you think about?
I think mine would be that you do the best with the information you have at the time. And I'm thinking really about like the budgeting quarter. It can be a little bit overwhelming to like set all of these numbers in place and have to stick to them. And we really do want to stick to the overall plan because that's important. But I think you do the best with the information you have at the time. And I see sometimes clients stressing out when we get into the next year and something's really changed. And so the budget is far off on a certain thing. But we do the best with the creating the budget, and then we adjust and create, absorb that impact and make sure we're getting back to a profitable level. So I think not putting too much stress into setting the budget, because ultimately we're going to have a solid plan, but we have the ability to absorb impacts too.
Yeah. And a budget is not meant for perfection.
Yeah.
I mean, you have said multiple times, and I love this, is like, if you match your budget like down to the penny, you basically just got lucky. Because there's kind of no way that we can plan for the future and have it be exact. So some people get tied up, especially if they have a perfectionism, any kind of like streak in them that they want to get it right or they want it to be perfect. A budget is never going to be perfect. It's about kind of setting us in the right direction and making sure that we're, keeping guardrails on in our decision making. And I think that's really what the budget does for us. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it's a guide. It's a guide, and it's a tool that we can use to help us, be more thoughtful in our decision making overall for our businesses. So, well, thank you, Laura. I really appreciate all the work you've put into the framework, and I think this has been an awesome discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for having me, Hannah. This was fun.
yeah. Well, and if anybody wants to reach out to us to learn more about CFO services or our framework that we have in place, you can go to our website and visit us at claracfo.com. And you could also reach out to either one of us on email. It's our first name at claracfo.com. And then you can also find us on LinkedIn. We both have a profile there you can go and check out. So feel free to reach out to us and connect. And tell us you heard us on the podcast, because there is a lot of spam on LinkedIn. So if people don't tell me why they're trying to connect, it's really hard to know why they're connecting. And then usually I just don't, because there's a lot of spam. So all right. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Financial Clarity Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about today's episode and click subscribe on your favorite podcast app.